it up, take it away, half a day later come back and do the fitting like a good tailor, so that the object is perfectly braced to be displayed like this. One of the inevitable problems with these life-size images is the weakest point is the ankles, and so they're often missing their feet, which creates certain display issues. One object which I actually didn't even select for the exhibition because I assumed it wouldn't be fit to travel, but the conservators in the Phnom Penh Museum said, oh yes, you should take it. No problem. It all fits together like a Lego kit. 6 pieces. It's Krishna Gavardhana, Krishna holding up the mountain from Phnom Dar in southern Cambodia. And it arrived just as a torso with a box of 6 pieces, and the Cambodian conservator put it together in about 4 hours. And it was dismantled and returned in the same state. A spectacular object. One of probably the single most important intact large-scale Ganesha, Ganapati, surviving from mainland Southeast Asia, recovered 1903 from the religious center of My Son in central Vietnam. This is the religious center that served the citadel of Truc Kieu just a little inland from the modern-day city of Da Nang in central Vietnam, and the Amaravati kingdom of Champa. And as we move into the exhibition, we begin with a 200-word text panel on the wall, which, believe me, writing 200 words is much harder than writing 2,000. Distilling the key ideas and getting the kernel of each idea and limiting the number of points so that you get this very precise information that people can take in a matter of minutes and have a sense of what the exhibition is about. They don't want to read an essay, they come to look at art. Next, please. Each room has a short text panel introducing the principal theme, 120 words, something like this, a little didactic. So we open the exhibition with a section called Exotic Imports. These are essentially foreign things found in Southeast Asia. What do we have? We have, this is the overview of the gallery. Next, please. Photo murals of river estuaries. One of the distinctive features of when you're looking at maps of early Southeast Asia and the earliest evidence for Indic presence, and the only way we know that is really where there's inscriptional evidence, early Sanskrit inscriptions appearing in Southeast Asia, which there are not that many, to be quite honest. Where are they located? If you plot where they're located, and then you look at where are the locations where there's naturally occurring gold? It's usually alluvial river gold. Then you find there's almost a perfect match between the location of the Sanskrit inscriptions and the key centers of gold production. Savana Dweepa, Savana Bhumi, these were the lands of gold they're referred to in the early Indian texts, and the names they gave to Southeast Asia were all linked to gold. And we know that India historically has had an insatiable appetite for gold, probably still does, if the government permitting. And so gold is at the center of many exchange systems, including dowry and so on. So sourcing gold was critically important. The other key nodal point in terms of early Indian settlement are the river estuaries. These are the bridge between the hinterland with its natural resources, forest products, gold, whatever, and the open sea, which is the international highway for long-distance trade. So the river estuary is a key point, and you go to any river estuary, say down the coast of Vietnam, go and walk out on the high point of the land, and the chances are you'll be walking on archaeological bricks and traces of early structures, many of which are not properly documented, but this is often how these were the locations of the earliest citadels of the little, I wouldn't call them kingdoms, little embryonic states that existed, clan-based communities with a strongman leader who prospered through supplying this international trade system, being the middleman between the hinterland the wealth of the hinterland, and the open trade, international trade. Exotic artifacts take many forms. You'll recognize it's ceramic clay seal, probably merchant seal, Bengal or Orissa, certainly Eastern India, probably a seal to go on a document or a bundle of trade goods, more likely excavated at one of the early moated cities of central Thailand. Next, please. Gold working, of course, very important. Early gold imagery. There's an early gold Buddha from Utong. It's one of the great early cities of central Thailand. And on the left, in Granta sort of Brahmi script, is a small stone which identifies itself as the property of the great goldsmith Paramal, found in the Malay Peninsula 20-odd years ago. It's a goldsmith's touchstone. So there were clearly goldsmiths and therefore members of gold working merchants guilds and crafts guilds operating in Southeast Asia. And we of course know about the Ayavole 500, the great guilds of medieval Deccan, and we know that they were active in Southeast Asia. They extended their reach. These were the global corporations of the mid-first millennium, and were active in Southeast Asia. They left inscriptions to prove that in Sumatra and in Malaya from the middle and late first millennium. So those merchant guilds who began in Aioli, in northern Karnataka, extended right down into southern India and to west coast Kerala. Their inscriptions are all over as very active merchant organizations. We know were also active in Southeast Asia. They didn't just stay at home. They were truly global corporate in this period. Next, please. Not forgetting the Chinese Buddhist pilgrim monks. And from the 5th century, from Faxian through to the 8th century in Xuanzang, we have a series of 8 or 10 diaries, essentially, of monastic life in India. These are the only first-hand observation accounts we have, which give detailed description of monastic life in the subcontinent in this period. So enormously important written sources. Of course, this is just the tip of a very big iceberg. There were thousands of these Chinese monks came. Many perished in the journey. Many didn't leave diaries, lived their life as monks, passed away as monks. The few that went back to China, principally to take back texts and spend their remaining years translating them into Chinese, did a great service to Buddhist studies, of course. Some of these texts have not survived in their original Sanskrit editions or Prakrit editions, only survive in the Chinese translations. So enormously important for reconstructing the wider corpus of early Buddhist literature. They also speak of the importance of stopping over in Southeast Asia. Srivijaya, some of you may be familiar with the center of Srivijaya, which archaeology is pointing fairly firmly at southern Sumatra, at Palembang, as the most likely location. One of the Chinese monk commentators recommends monks coming by sea. You had two options. You could come the Silk Route, across Central Asia in through the northwest, tough journey, or you could come by sea. Easier, but probably more dangerous. Ships routinely disappeared. So the advice was stop off in Srivijaya, spend a year or two polishing your Sanskrit. Don't go be a complete novice, don't just arrive untutored. Get your Sanskrit in shape and then continue to India and request to be admitted to one of the Mahaviharas. See if you're good enough to be let in by the gatekeeper to study at one of the great Mahaviharas of northern or eastern India. Roman coins, Roman seals recovered in Thailand. On the left, that's a Roman coin, 3rd century AD, late Roman, minted in Cologne, in Germany. in Roman Germany, and excavated in Thailand. It didn't travel there direct. It went obviously through a whole chain of exchange that probably was involved in the pepper trade to Malabar, and then probably the muslin trade to Bengal, etc., but ended up in central Thailand. The intaglio seals on the right, recovered from what we understand as a trading centre, an entrepot in the Mekong Delta called Okyo. Again, lots of exotic objects that found their way into those communities. Byzantium, we used to call this a Roman lamp. It's not that early. It's probably 8th century Byzantium lamp excavated on the borders of Burma, Thailand. I mentioned these early cities, these early moated cities. These were large urban centres. This is urbanisation early to mid-first millennium of a scale which was as substantial as almost anything globally, with a few notable exceptions, bigger than most cities in Europe at this period. And these large rectangular urban centres within a much larger agrarian base beyond the moated fortified walls of the enclosure. It's an aerial view of one in Burma. Now, we know that foreign merchants were active in the region, but we find these objects, these artifacts that tell us that, but what we didn't know was the identity of many of them. And two things have come to light recently. Just in the last 6 months, I've been privileged to visit an excavation site being conducted by the Thai Archaeology Department in the Gulf of Thailand. A new shipwreck has been discovered 8 kilometres in from the coastline, but it was almost certainly lost at sea originally, probably just at the shoreline somewhere. But with the expansion of the coastline, it's now an interior location, mangrove delta sort of region. The vessel itself had a mix of, it clearly done its business. It was, the goods had already been traded, probably up to Nakhon Pathom, which was one of the great Mon cities, a little southwest of Bangkok. You can visit today on an expressway. It'll take you 1 hour to get there. Nakhon Pathom was one of the great urban centres of the first millennium, and the ship was probably serving that centre. The ship architecture is very clear. It's an Arab dhow. This is the second Arab dhow that's been found now in the last 15 years in Southeast Asia, and the only two archaeologically discovered outside the Arabian Peninsula in this early period. Enormously important. It's probably dated from the ceramic evidence to the 8th century. So probably second half of the 750, 800, that sort of date. So what were Arab dhows doing in the Gulf of Thailand? Well, we know they were going to China already. This is no secret. But they seemed also then to have been trading locally along the way, which is not in itself surprising. When they excavated one of the great stupas at Nakhon Pathom, this building brick was recovered on the left of the screen. Doesn't know what's a brick doing in an exhibition. The brick itself was incised when the clay was wet by a workman, probably in his lunch break or rather bored, and he made a graffiti, a sketch of a foreign merchant he'd seen in the streets of Nakhon Pathom. That's the only explanation there can be for this piece of graffiti. And what it shows is a West Asian merchant, probably Sogdian. We know them from Central Asian evidence. A Sogdian merchant, probably from Iran or that sort of northern Iran, somewhere like that, active in Thailand in the early 8th century. We have no textual evidence for this, but now we have the archaeological evidence. So you start to build a picture of how international the region was. India was at the heart of this exchange. It wasn't the only player. China was there as well. It's left less legacy, and international merchants were there, Persians, Arabs, and so on. The next section acknowledges what was there before. Before that Buddhism and Hinduism prospered in Southeast Asia, it wasn't a blank canvas. There were indigenous religions and belief systems, and of course, just as in early India, you have a whole system of Naga, Naginis, of Yaksha, Yakshi cults and so on, which were absorbed into the mainstream religions, usually in a subsidiary role, as a supporting caste, if you like, particularly into Buddhism and Jainism, but also into Brahmanism. In Southeast Asia, we see plenty of evidence of this on the right-hand screen, an early stele, an enthroned figure on a snake. Is he a Nagaraja? Is he a Yaksha figure protected by a snake? We don't know. But a 1 meter high sculpture. This is an important image, probably dating as early as the 6th century from central Vietnam. Snakes protecting deities. We all know about this. We have the Jina Pasvanatha, we have the Buddha protected by Mukhalinga, you have the cobra hood providing shelter to the Shaiva Linga. The protective Naga is pervasive imagery in South Asia. In Southeast Asia, you can see how ideas were so quickly adopted. The snake protecting the Buddha is a very comfortable idea. It's a land dominated by water and by snakes and by buffaloes. It's agrarian wet rice cultivation land, monsoonal. So these sets of ideas and imagery very quickly were received and absorbed into the Southeast Asian belief system. I mentioned inscriptions. These are incredibly important. One of the very earliest ones from the 5th century comes from the east coast of Borneo, a little kingdom called Kutai. It's in the narrow stretch of water between Borneo, Kalimantan and Sulawesi, Indonesia. And the inscription, there are a series of stones which are described in the inscription as Yupa stones. And many of you all know that Yupa stones are used in Vedic sacrifice. And there's a spectacular example of this in the Mathura Museum. And the inscription makes very clear that Vedic ritual was being performed in eastern Borneo in the 5th century. Now, eastern Borneo is a remote place today. It's actually quite difficult to get to. In the 5th century, it was probably rather easier. It's enormously wealthy for gold and hard stones and so on. So the Indian merchants were drawn there. Brahmins went to give ritual service, and their descendants, I'm not saying there were endless waves of Brahmins going, but they settled, they intermarried, and the tradition continued. We have from West Java, not far from modern-day Jakarta, a river location with this rock-cut inscription. You'll recognise the footprints. It's very likely going to be Vishnu, but it is indeed Vishnu. The inscription confirms it's a Vishnupad, and it names the king Purnavarman, Indic name, and mentions his deeds and achievements. It's cut into the living rock in a river. So, of course, in monsoon season, what happens is, of course, it's washed or lustrated, shall we say, by the river, blessed by the river. So this becomes a very powerful piece of symbolism. It then has these large cursive letters, which I think are more talismanic, more like mantras, and I think have a protective role. And there's this particular rock, which is very famous, and another one on the other side of the naturally formed river island, which appears to have been his citadel. It was fortified, and we can still see the earthworks around what's now cultivated land. And we're talking here early 6th century AD. We can skip this. Next one. Okay, at the top of that mountain I showed you from in Laos, an expedition went up about 8 years ago, and just under the summit of the Linga Pravata, they found this linga and basin, single integrated, cut from one stone, quite fairly small, about 18 inches square. An offering stone here, platform, and some fired brick. So clearly a small shrine right beneath the summit of the mountain. It took the team 8 hours of difficult climbing to get to the summit. It's not exactly a regular pilgrim site, but clearly priests went up there and performed pujas beneath the Linga Pravata, beneath the holy mountain of Shiva in antiquity. This is the important point. And this is the mountain under which King Devanika in the 5th century had his Abhishek, according to his inscription. Bottom here, it's a little hard to read, but it's Ekamukha Linga. It's a Shiva Linga with one human face, and the priest performing a puja. Just to give you some sense of the objects in this early section, next. Remarkable lintel, the Kurtimukha mask, very, very exceptional example recovered near the great lake of Cambodia. Tonle Sap is the biggest inland lake in all of Southeast Asia. Next, please. I mentioned yakshas and nagarajas. Here they are in Cambodia, from Angkor Borai, which is the southern capital, probably the capital of Funan, and then Chen La, were the two divisions of the waterlands and the dry interior of ancient Cambodia, which were eventually united in probably the 6th century into a single entity, which is essentially what Cambodia is today. The political map imprint of Cambodia was already clearly established by